Hello, good morning. I have a question for the two of you, but especially for the State Secretary, because we're in Spain. You were saying at the end of both your presentations that politicians can also do something. I would like to know whether there is a specific program to reduce the gap, because you've mentioned that this is something that goes beyond schools and it implies teachers and parents. Do you foresee any kind of activity or program? Does the OECD have any recommendation for public administrations? Well, yes, as you know, the education reform foresees the national tests, independent national tests, and in this first year of introduction of the LOMCE, the legislation, we begin at the third year in primary school. This is an early test which should not have any academic impact. It's only a way of identifying in an early stage the problems that children may have with reading and mathematics. For the first time, we will have a tool available that will help us identify any problem that in reading and mathematical skills in an early stage, so that we will be able to give them whatever support is necessary to overcome the situation. Besides that, the Ministry announced a couple of weeks ago a new program so that older university students can help out primary school teachers in the different areas, so that they also can do internships in primary schools where there is difficulties because of a high repeat level, or because there's a large population of immigrant students whose mother tongue may not be Spanish, and that kind of problems, to help teachers in these situations, these difficult situations, to obtain support.
The wonderful book, ABC of Gender Equality in Education, you will find an annex in this book, because 12 member countries of the PISA study answered a questionnaire about their different approaches to improve the situation. And there are very different approaches from the United States, from the UK, Germany is part of it, and Belgium, for example. And I think one aspect many countries are focused on is how to improve the low performing of boys as a whole. I think that's a very important aspect. But there are also some ideas in this annex collected about increasing the interest of girls in science and mathematics, because you have seen the figures. It's not a problem of only a few countries. For example, my home country, Germany, I've seen it in one of the slides of our State Secretary, that the figures for Germany are worse than the figures of Spain, for example, when you look at the number of young girls going to university and studying something like engineering and technology. And there is, since a few years now, an initiative in Germany promoting studies of girls, initiative financed by the government, by the industry, also by the universities, organized to improve the situation. And like I said before, in these books you will find a lot of different examples what can be done. That is one of our classic approach at the OECD, lessons learned and ideas collecting from other countries, and to give these as a kind of different potential instruments to try to influence the situation.
Sí, a la Secretaria de Estado quería preguntarle por qué.
I have a question to the State Secretary. She's mentioned the gender gap in 2003, and I understand that apart from external audits and internships for girls and boys, there's not really anything else. Does the government foresee to do something else specifically to narrow this gender gap? The reason why we have increased the gender gap are not quite clear. As we was saying, this is a very complex issue where society as a whole, the families, the teachers, all have an influence. And as in many other results obtained, we realized that the performance of our students has decreased, has worsened. However, before we did not have an assessment system to identify problems on time and to give the students support. And I think that in this education reform, there are two items which are fundamental for this kind of problem or any kind of gender gap that may arise during their education. The fact that we have these tests, the fact that there are support programs for students lagging behind, no matter whether the fact that they're lagging behind is because they are in a disadvantaged situation or because they have problems in specific subjects. We also have 22 million to support teachers, and we also foresee going from a very rigid system as the one we have now to a more flexible system where in the third and fourth year of primary school we will be helping out students who may have problems. So all this will help us identify the problems. We have a number of tools to help out students lagging behind in any area, be it because of the gender gap or because they are in a disadvantaged situation or because they come from migrant families undergoing a difficult situation or because they do not quite speak Spanish or any other reason. Hello, good morning. I have a question for the two of you. It is a rather risky question because I would like to know your personal opinion, which is probably not based on any statistics. How do you think what influence does gender gap have on the fact that most mathematics problems are men? So when if mathematics teachers were women, do you think the gender gap would narrow?
Sorry, just very quickly. Yo es que no sé si podemos.
Well, I don't know if we can answer the question because I don't know if the premise is right. And obviously in primary school, the teachers are not mainly men, the teachers are mainly women in primary school, so I would discard that as a possible factor. So the premise is wrong.
El número de hombres.
Well, given the number of men that do mathematics, and that is what we base on in PISA, well, I don't have the data of maths teachers, so the only thing I can look for them and I can give them to you, but the only thing that I can relate it to right now is that the proportion of science students is the same for men and women, and so therefore that makes me think that perhaps we cannot conclude on the basis of the data that we presented today that the majority of maths teachers are men. And I don't think that we conclude either that most language teachers are women. We can't conclude that. I don't think we have a basis to be able to know whether that premise is right or not.
Yeah, only two remarks to this question. One remark is, I think when you look at the average of the OECD member countries, our main problem is not if there are more female or more male teachers for mathematics and science. Our main problem in the most OECD member countries is, have we enough teachers for science and mathematics? And when you look at the figures, how many people are studying technology, engineering, mathematics, this problem will increase in the future because in many of our member countries there's a lot of demand, a lot of need for these people from the industry, from the private business, and that means it's difficult for the schools to get enough teachers, except of the question which sex they have. And the second remark is we have one interesting figure in our review. We looked for the role model of female, of mothers who are engaged in technology and engineering business. You talked about the situation that if women are working, situation is improving. But what we have seen is there is no impact if the mother is working on technology, engineering and science to the results of the outcome of the children in these classes. That means I'm not sure that there's really a link at the end to the sex of the teacher.
¿Se puede concluir de alguna forma?
Can we conclude in some way, if there's nothing innate that lays down that gap, that girls have to be worse than maths and boys worse in reading? Can we conclude that the expectations that parents have, the media or parents or schools have, or will set their tastes, whether they will be good or bad? They may think, therefore, that because it is expected that I will be good in maths, really I'm going to be good, and since I'm expected to be weaker in maths, therefore I will be weaker. Can you conclude that? Is that the conclusion? Or? Well, in the graph which compares countries with better performance with countries with worse performance in maths shows that when students have a good performance, there's no gap. And what that shows is that a good educational system improves the performance of students and avoids gaps. It does both things simultaneously. And so obviously there is nothing, well, I repeat the word that you used, because then the headline will be given to me, innate. So why girls? Why do girls have that greater anxiety or greater worry about maths that afterwards seems to have an influence on their performance? Or why do boys have less interest for reading and more interest for video games, which later appears to have an influence on their performance? Obviously, the causes are very complex and go far beyond the classroom. Obviously, there have to be influences of all sorts: families, friends, parents, family, what they see on TV. Well, to be more specific than that, I don't think that we can do that based on this analysis that we have.
No, I fully agree with Ms. Gomendio that there is not only one reason. It is not so easy to explain it by only one reason. For example, when we talk about video gaming, it's very clear that the peer pressure for 15-year-old boys is much higher than the peer pressure for 15-year-old girls. This is one example for many influences we have. But it is very clear. The expectations young students learn at home is, I think, a very important reason for decisions later on when to talk about professional careers.
Buenos días.
Hello. Well, good morning. I would like to ask you whether you think that differentiated education is an alternative to reduce that gap between girls and boys. In fact, that is one of the arguments that these education centers put forward when they defend this educational model.
The we have are not really very clear at this issue. That means it's difficult to give a recommendation for this. But I think our experience, our common experience is that in nearly every of these 65 countries who are part of these studies, the time of segregated education is over. We normally have a situation that we have a common education for both sexes, and for me, it's very difficult to imagine that we go back beyond this development of the last 20 years in most of the OECD and other key partner countries we have in the PISA studies.
solo decir que en España...
Just want to say that in Spain, the percentage of students that choose the differentiated school model, the segregated, is much lower than the OECD. It's not even 1%, and we understand that it's the choice of families which is not based on any scientific evidence indicating better or worse performance.
Sí, es una
Yes, this is a question for Sargamendi. You've talked about the lower performance in the resolving problems in Spain. It's below the OECD average. I wanted you to explain that, and also that in sciences you talked about worry. So it is an option that has gone down. So can you give us a bit more detail about that? Thank you. Well, within PISA, there is a specific part which is dedicated to analyzing the capacity of students in order to resolve complex problems, not only to measure their level of know-how knowledge, but also once that they have that knowledge, it's also necessary to have them, to be able to implement them in order to resolve problems, new problems, complex problems that are put to them on the day of the test. And there are students that have a lower performance than the average of other OECD countries in science, mathematics and reading, and they have an even worse performance or result because the methodology of the educational system still concentrated too much on memorizing contents and not enough on resolving problems or problem solving or teamwork or writing essays creatively, or to be able to defend a point of view in public, and all other questions that other educational models in other countries have already included and borne in mind. And with regards to the concern for the reduction of science, obviously it is very low and it is getting lower, and so what we've done here for sciences is two things. On the one hand, to reinforce maths and sciences as trunk subjects, as core subjects, and also to make available to all students and their families on the ministry website the level, all the universities of Spain, so that when they choose what they're going to study, if they choose to do that, they can also bear in mind the level of employability that can be seen on the website for those careers. Because one of the things that you can see in one of the graphs, more than 50% of the students, and here I'm not talking about gender gap, I'm talking for everyone as a whole, choose legal and social sciences because of the huge number of people that we have qualified in this particular area of knowledge. There's a huge number of unemployment, a high number of unemployment. So we have to give information to families about levels of employment, levels of employability, so that they can look at the equation at the time that they decide what career or what they want to study later on. Thank you.
Yes, I have a question for Ms. Gomendio. Does the ministry foresee any measure beyond analyzing the situation in Spain? Do you have any specific measures to reduce this gender gap? So you have mentioned a number of tests whereby we will study the situation in the classrooms, but beyond that, do you have any other program? I'd like to know what other countries have done, whether they have also hired or sent students from the university to the schools to help teachers. I cannot answer anything else. I can just repeat that there will be tests whereby we will identify problems in the third year of the primary school. There will be also support measures for students lagging behind, and this academic year we will have 20 million euros for students to help out teachers at schools to overcome a number of the problems that they have. I cannot really add anything else at this point.
A few remarks. Like I tried to explain earlier, it would be a little bit short-term minded if we believe that this is only a responsibility of governments. It is very clear that governments always are responsible for the education system. But like I told you, there is a lot of responsibilities about parents. There's a lot of responsibilities when we look at the teachers himself. There's a lot of responsibilities of the whole society. And when you ask for experiences in other countries, it is very clear that based on this data, the gender gap in education is an issue since only a few years in many countries we looked at. And that means we have some lessons learned, I told you before, and you can look at it, but it's very early in this process, and I'm sure we will see a lot of progress in the next few years, because many, many countries in the study now have seen, okay, there is a problem, there is a gender gap, there are more opportunities for our education system if we can close, if we can narrow this gender gap, and they work on it, and I'm sure in a few years we will see more results and more ideas, more lessons learned. We can talk about it for other countries.
Solo me gustaría añadir una cosa, y es que
I'd simply like to add that apart from the fact that all the results that we have presented, of course, the government's responsibility is indeed important, but it's not really the only one. So this involves the family, the employers, and society. Having said that, and now speaking about the government's responsibility, which is indeed very important, in the last graph that I showed you, where we compare countries, high-performing countries and low-performing countries, we can see that when there's high performance, this goes beyond gender gaps. We do not need specific programs to overcome gender gap or specific programs to overcome that and that gap. The right educational model, like the one that this model foresees in the educational reform, and if you want, we can organize a new press conference to explain what this reform is, but that would not be very nice towards Stefan Kapferer. So this reform is about completely different rules of the game, very similar to those used in high-performing countries, because, as I said, our educational reform is evidence-based, and the OECD has many reports based on evidence, and we have based ourselves on many reports of the OECD and other international reports. So that last graph is extremely important because it shows that a system which helps their students overcome the performance problem then overcomes all kinds of gender gaps. So when you ask me what other measures we can take, I will say we will not be implementing any specific measure to solve that specific problem. We will introduce a radically different educational model so that all students will improve their performance. We will also improve the gender gap and any other gap, including that of disadvantage because of social problems, or the fact that the students come from immigrant families, or because and therefore do not speak Spanish, or any other such problem. The main, and here I become a little bit philosophical, but since you've asked me 3 times already, the main, and I hope that the Under-Secretary General agrees with me, for me and for the team who have introduced this education reform, the main objective of an education model needs to be that education should become the biggest engine for social mobility. That is, all students need to be able to develop their full potential no matter where they come from or any other gender or any other kind of bias that can affect their performance. And therefore, what we're trying to convey to you is that a change of rules in the educational system, such as the LOMSC, will be able, as happened in other countries, because we're following the model in those countries, will be able to improve the performance of all countries and to overcome the gaps, including the gender gap. Okay, we can now adjourn this meeting. Thank you very much for your attendance.